Hey folks, it's Nate. Thanks for joining me at the art table again today. We're taking another look today at comic concepts, a general set of ideas that I tend to talk about when I am critiquing concepts, and I thought I would make a series of videos kind of laying out what I mean so that I can point to them as a kind of shorthand to explain what I mean by these concepts. I've already done one on each panel being a story, and this is going to be on leading the eye. As I said in my first video in this series, these are things to keep in mind. They are general rules of thumb. You don't have to treat them as religious, but they are, good tools for creating specific outcomes as you lay out art or as you write a story. Today we're going to look at 3 pages from chapter 144 of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Some context: in this series of chapters, 2 of our heroes, Polnareff and Kakkoin, are fighting 2 of their enemies. Specifically, in these 3 pages, they are dealing with an enemy known as the Hanged Man. Although they don't know it yet, the Hanged Man is a supernatural entity that can jump from one reflective surface to another and can kill you by attacking your reflection in whatever reflective surface it currently inhabits. Right now, they are using a car in order to try and make their escape from their enemies, and the Hanged Man is the only one of their 2 enemies who is relevant to this part of the story. So we really only have 3 characters to worry about. Now, what you're seeing right now is the first of the 3 pages we're going to look at. The story on this page is pretty simple. There's no dialogue and just some sound effects and some action, in which we see Kakkoin stomp on the brakes, causing the car to go into an uncontrolled spin, flip over, and crash. As a reminder, these pages are intended to be read right to left, as that is the way the Japanese language is written. So, how does Hirohiko Araki lead the eye in these pages? We begin in the top right panel, where we see Kakkoin's foot slamming down on the brakes. The line of this action naturally leads us into the sound effect of the car screeching as it begins to skid. This screeching is set over top of some action lines, which naturally curve our eye around the top of the panel. From there, we pick up the rear of the car, and the lines of the car just naturally bring us forward into the bottom right-hand corner of this panel. The grille of the car and the dust it kicks up naturally bring us down into the next panel. From there, we see the car flip. The lines showing the spinning motion of the car naturally bring us down to the next sound effect. Reading the sound effect takes us from right to left naturally into the horizon line of this panel and the next, leading us into the car crash itself and the end of the page. There is a very natural, clean progression from the top right-hand corner of the page to the bottom left-hand corner of the page, where the story of this page ends. By the way, if you go back and analyze this situation from the perspective of Kisho Tenketsu, each of these panels also represents one of those stages, but that's neither here nor there. What's important here is that the basic lines of every panel on this page are laid out so that you can naturally follow them in a virtually unbroken stream from beginning to end. This is leading the eye in its essence, and it is an important thing to think about as you are laying out a page. Having this kind of flow built into your artwork makes it much, much easier for a reader to understand the order of events on the page. It can make even very complicated stories easy to follow. We see this on the very next page. Here we see Kakkoin and Polnareff recovering from their crash. This page actually begins with a speech bubble, just a grunt of pain. Reading that speech bubble naturally brings us to the bottom of the car, and following the line of the chassis around brings us to Kakkoin crawling out of the window, and Polnareff who is already outside the car. Not quite clear how he survived that, but good on him. From there, we have another speech bubble which pulls us naturally down into the next panel. After reading the speech bubble, we see Polnareff. We follow his line of sight to Kakkoin, who is also speaking, giving us another speech bubble to read, and then we can follow Kakkoin's arm down into the next panel. This is a very small panel, and really all it is the edge of Polnareff's face, and we can follow the line of his face in profile up to the sound effect. The sound effect, again read right to left, naturally brings us to the bottom right-hand corner of the next panel. This panel is set up in a very zigzag formation. From the sound effect in the previous panel, we see a line of light. This is the hanged man making its jump from one reflective surface to another. In this case, a reflective piece of debris on the ground into a part of the car, marked with a small burst of light. That small burst of light is positioned right next to Kek Polnareff, whose body and arm point us down into the next panel. By following the line of Polnareff's arm, we immediately arrive at Polnareff's head in the next panel. We can follow his line of sight to the car, where again we see the hanged man making a jump between reflective surfaces. Again, this is marked with lines, and by following those lines, we get back to the body of the car, the outline of which points us into the next panel. To ensure that we enter panel 6 in the correct location, a sound effect actually breaks out of the border of the panel, capturing our eye and drawing us in to where Polnareff is spinning his head to look at the bumper of the car. The lines of his spin and the line of his eye naturally direct us to the bumper of the car, where we see his distorted reflection, then pointing us to the hanged man itself, which has just arrived. This line naturally leads us to a gleam that shows us how reflective the bumper is, which again is an important part of the mechanics of this fight, but we also see a gleam indicating the line of travel by which the hanged man has arrived in the bumper. While in the narrative of the story, this is one of the first things to happen in this panel, it is the last thing we see, and it naturally leads us down into the next panel, a very brilliant reversal in the order of operations on Araki's part. The final two panels show us the hanged man beginning his attack on Polnareff's reflection, and they basically function in reverse of the previous panel. We follow the curve of the bumper back to the left-hand side of this panel, where there is an exclamation mark which brings us back up to Polnareff's line of sight in the next panel, bringing us to the end of the page. Now, I initially debated whether I needed to include any more panels here, because I really feel like the general function of leading the eye is well illustrated by just the 2 pages. But this page in particular includes some tricks that I think are important to keep in mind, because it is not just the art that is involved in leading the eye. On this page, we see that a little bit of the typesetting is involved in leading the eye as well. We did see a little bit of that on the previous page, but I think you probably could have taken those speech bubbles out, and you still would have followed the action just by its layout very well. However, if you are a letterer and you have an opportunity to use your lettering to enhance the way you lead the eye across a page, I think this is a good example of some very subtle ways you can do that. Of course, the act of laying out tails to speech bubbles and things like that are intended to lead the eye in a very real and immediate way, directing speech to the person who is speaking. You can also keep in mind the general flow of the art and try to enhance it at least a little bit. Of course, for Araki, sound effects are actually a part of his art composition. I don't believe he adds them using a digital tool or pre-produced pack, and even if he did do that now, these were done in the 90s when I'm sure such things did not exist. And we've seen that on other pages as well, but he uses them to particular effect on this page, so I thought I would hang on to it as part of our analysis. That said, we're going to go through things pretty quickly from here on out. Right off the bat, we have a great example of how the sound effects contribute to the lines of the page, because again, we have this huge sound effect to read from right to left on the top of the page, which naturally blends with these flowing lines of motion that are, again, showing us the hanged man attacking Polnareff in the reflection. From the tip of the hanged man's knife, we are naturally grabbed by this exclamation mark at the end of the next sound effect, which brings us back down and to the left in the next panel, all the way over to Polnareff's face, where the lines of his nose bring us to the bottom of the panel, and then back out around to the end of the knife again. This is something else you can do by leading the eye. By actually dragging the person through the entirety of the panel, you make it stretch out more across the page. They're actually spending more time taking it in, which emphasizes this moment of tension and gives a different pacing to your page, because instead of just zipping right through the panels, as you might have been doing on the first page we looked at, you're actually taking this time to swoosh back and forth across the panel twice on both of these panels. Here again, we have text and in this case a speech balloon overlapping panels to drag us down into the next panel on the page. In this case, we have Polnareff screaming, which again pulls us into one of these little loops. We read down the speech bubble, we arrive at Polnareff's shoulder, and then we come over to his face, which draws us back up into the lines on the background across the top of the page, and into the silver chariot, his stand, which is readying an attack. By following the arm of his stand, we arrive at his next speech balloon. As Polnareff orders his stand to attack, we follow those words into the sound effect of the attack, and also, via the lines in the background, we follow the attack itself as Silver Chariot makes a series of stabbing motions against the hanged man. Without serious attention to the layout of the text and the sound effects on this page, the eye would not be led quite as naturally as it is with them. Again, it's a little thing, but by making sure these things line up, you enhance the flow of the page. Your reader spends less time trying to figure out what order things play out in, what information is important to them, and what is incidental to what is going on, and they get a better story. That is the power of leading the eye across the page. It can stretch out panels, it can speed through them, it can make a very dense series of panels very clear and readable, even though you don't take the time to put a bunch of arrows across them, breaking rather than enhancing the flow of your story. So all in all, when the eye is properly led across a page, your story just becomes better. There's no reason not to do it as often as you can. We see that little things like panel borders, or even maintaining strict perspective with your horizon lines may be secondary to maintaining that flow of your page as the eye is led across it. In general, I suspect that this is something that has to be done at the thumbnailing stage. I've drawn a fair number of comic pages myself, and I have never been able to go back and retcon in leading the eye to a page, so I would think about it as part of the initial outlining of your page rather than something that you try and come up with at the end. Again, the layout of your text and your sound effects can help with it a little bit, but even these things are things I would think about at the beginning thumbnail part of your process rather than at the very tail end. So yeah, this is something, if you really want it to be present on your page, I would start thinking about right out of the gate. Anyway, there you have it. 3 pages of what I mean when I talk about leading the eye by a master of the craft who has had his art displayed at the Louvre. Let me know what you think of it down in the comments below. There's a like button and a subscribe button down there. You can use those as you see fit, and I'll talk to you later.